I've decided to reach out to Tim Ballard, who is the man who the movie is about, and to Jim Caviezel, who's the actor that plays him, to talk about what all this signifies. And so, Tim, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jordan. We're so grateful you take your time to do this with us. So I spent 12 years as a special agent, undercover operator with the Department of Homeland Security. Most of my time, 90% of that time, was spent investigating these cases, child crimes, child trafficking. And in fact, those numbers are correct, that are being, these are Department of Labor, UN, these are sources that, the best we have, that say that there's close to 6 million children or more who are forced into sex slavery, labor slavery, or organ harvesting. And I can attest that I have been involved in cases involving all three of those forms of slavery multiple times, and is a real thing. It's not even far from home. The United States is the number one consumer year after year of child rape material. And oftentimes we're close to number one in production. And it's a serious matter. The case, the story in Sound of Freedom kicks off with the rescue of a little boy at the port of entry at the southern border. That's a real story, a real boy that I was on that port of entry. I was 10 years on the southern border. So when you have 85,000 unaccompanied minors showing up in the last 2 years, being let into the country without the sponsor being vetted, DNA checked, background checked. I call it the economy of pedophilia. The United States, we're the demand. 85,000 children, thousands of them are under 5 years old, are let into the country. So we have a serious problem, and it's not being addressed as it should be. Hopefully, this film can do that.
What has been your experience with regard to so-called mainstream media or legacy media coverage? How much attention has been paid to this? And if not much, why? And if reasonably, who and how?
Well, I think not very much has been. Attention has been given by mainstream media. Oftentimes, it's more innocent than cynical, perhaps, where it's just, this is too dark. I don't want to expose our audience to this horrific thing. We film our operations. I mean, I'm going to post today another operation in West Africa of a baby factory. I mean, these are real cases where they've kidnapped women, as young as 13-year-olds and children, and they impregnate them, they rape them, and they make babies, and they take these babies and sell them for their organs, sell them for sex, sell them for satanic ritual abuse. Like, it does sound crazy. That's why I film it. We film our operations so that we can show the world this is very real. It's really happening. And I think if there's 2 million children forced into commercial sex, which is the most kind of credible statistic that we can find, a lot of people are involved. So there is a more cynical answer to your question, which may be there's people that don't want this exposed because they're involved in it.
What is there a particular conspiracy theory that you were criticized for refusing to condemn? Do you have any more specific details about that?
I mean, I'm not sure what exactly they're talking about. They might be referring to the fact that there's something called adrenochrome, where they're taking children's blood and devouring it and so forth. And I've explained my experience with that, and I just did in West Africa and other places. We've seen this in several parts of the continent of Africa, and it's very real. It's very real. This witch doctory. They take these children. They take their organs. They take their blood. They drink it. They take the genitalia of children and hang it over the rooftop of their businesses, thinking that the dark gods will bless them. These are real things.
So let me turn to Jim. Jim, can you hear me?
Yes.
So do you want to run us briefly through, I don't want to give away the entire plot because that would obviously be pointless, but do you want to just run us briefly through, Jim, the plot of the movie, and then I'll turn to Tim and fill in some of the background details of his life?
So I play Tim Ballard. He's Homeland Security. He sets up these sting operations to take down these very, very bad men to save trafficked children. And in one particular case, one of the traffickers that he takes down, Ernst Lipachinski, he rescues this boy, and the little boy turns to him and says, "Will you save my sister?" And Tim goes back gets the direction from above and from his wife, and goes back and he sells everything to find this little girl.
Tim, do you want to walk everybody listening through? Let's go back into the details of your life. Now, you worked for this. You worked for the Special Forces per se, and who were you working for before you decided to forego your career and to pursue the case that we're describing?
So I worked for 12 years as a special agent and undercover operator for the Department of Homeland Security, the investigative division called Homeland Security Investigations. 10 of those years were spent on the border, tracking child traffickers, people who would exploit children with child exploitation material. So I really learned a lot. In 2006, the laws changed in the United States. And for the first time, U.S. agents were permitted and encouraged to go overseas and find children who Americans were abusing, and we could now hold those Americans accountable as if they had committed that crime on U.S. soil. That's what really changed my life, because I speak Spanish fluently, and they sent me overseas, south of the border. That's when my eyes opened up, and I started seeing the children that I used to only see mostly on the pornography, on the child exploitation material cases. But it was tormenting me. The U.S. government unwittingly was, because if I couldn't find that connection back to the United States, the American kid or the American pedophile, I had to come home. But the problem is I've already been exposed to the children. I've already been exposed to the problem, and oftentimes have made myself the bait. And in 2012, I had enough on this case. I went further than otherwise I probably should have. The movie didn't have time to tell you that there was another case in Haiti at the same time that I was working, thinking there was a U.S. nexus. And I was told in both instances to come home and you couldn't work these cases. And that's when I had a very consequential conversation with my wife. And I said, if I stay here, if I do this operation with or without my badge, it doesn't matter at this point. I can do the work. We will save kids. But I have to lose my job, and we have 6 children, and this is a moral dilemma like I've never faced in my life. And I was hoping my wife would have responded with, "Get your ass home. You can't abandon us. First of all, you're going to die without the top cover of the U.S. government if you continue this, and who's going to pay the bills and feed the kids?" She didn't say that. She said to me, "You have to quit your job." And it was that easy for her. It became spiritual for her even. She felt a calling and a responsibility that she might have to reckon with one day when she meets her maker. And I knew that she felt that way when she told me this in the crucial moment of decision, about 2 days before I ended up turning my badge and gun over and went private. She said to me, "I will not let you jeopardize my salvation by not doing this." And when she said those words, and I knew she meant those words, that changed everything for me. And we jumped into really just an irrational act of service, I might call it, because it wasn't rational in many ways. But ultimately, it ended in the operation you see depicted in the film, which shows 54 children, some adult women, young adult women were in that group as well, rescued on that island. But what the movie doesn't have the time to report is that in actuality, it was 120. There was 2 other locations being taken down at the same time. And there's a documentary that's going to follow in the wake of Sound of Freedom called Triple Take. Angel Studios will put it out, documenting the entire story. And so in the end, it was successful, and we were able to build upon that success. And I founded Operation Underground Railroad. I run another foundation that was founded by Glenn Beck called the Nazarene Fund. And we're doing these kind of operations all over the world today.
So let's go back in time to before you worked as a security agent for the Homeland or an agent for the Homeland Security Investigations Unit. How were you trained to do that? Like, what was your background before you became employed as an agent, and what was it about you that made you capable of engaging in this sort of operation?
So I got a graduate degree in international politics. And I always wanted to be in federal law enforcement. My first job was CIA. I was there during 9/11. working in the operations center. In the wake of 9/11, I found out that I studied terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. That was actually the degree I got at the Monterey Institute of International Studies. And so I was an easy recruit into the CIA because, 9/11 had just happened. When I found out that one of the terrorists, Mohammed Atta, had staged his attack from Mexicali, Mexico, and crossed the border, and I speak Spanish, I wanted to go fight terrorism on the southern border. So I ended up jumping ship from CIA, and I joined the newly created Homeland Security Department, and became a special agent. For 6 months, I was tracking those kind of movements, not human trafficking or child exploitation, but money, guns, terrorism. 6 months into that endeavor, I was called into the office of a supervisor, and they asked me if I would please forego everything that I wanted to do with my career and help them start a child crimes unit. I do not know why they asked me. One thing he did say to me was, "You're a young agent, but you're a person of faith. And we know that about you, and that's a requirement, or your soul will be crushed."
I would like you, if you would, to tell us, to the degree that you can, what you were typically dealing with when you started working for the Child Sex Crimes Unit. Let us know what you saw. Let us know what that did to you, because that sort of thing, that changes people's conceptions of humanity per se. Let's say the nature of the cosmos and what it means to be human, right? I mean, when you're in contact with people who are capable of that level of darkness, you start to understand something about the nature of the human soul that you can't understand any other way. And that can be that's the sort of thing that gives people post-traumatic stress disorder when they're soldiers. So, and now you said also your supervisors had an inkling that you might be protected against that, at least to some degree, because of your faith. So let's walk through what you learned and encountered first. What did you see when you were working as part of this child sex crimes unit?
What I saw was so shocking, Jordan. I thought child sex crimes would be 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds. My brain couldn't comprehend something more evil than abusing that age. The very first case I worked in 2002, I believe, I was given a bunch of VHS videos, some hard drives to look at that had been seized in a warrant. The very first image I saw were there were three little boys that were probably 7, 5, and 3, and they looked like my children. They had blonde hair, blue eyes, and they were being just raped, these 3 little boys, by this pedophile. And I was so shocked. I fell to my knees. I dry heaved, thinking I was going to throw up into the wastebasket. I jumped into my car. I drove to my children's school, my 3 oldest kids. I checked them out. I still remember in my mind, I can still see dentist appointment I wrote. And I grabbed them. I took them home and just sobbed on the floor. My wife came in, and I wouldn't let the kids go. I was just holding them and shaking. That was my very first experience. You talk about PTSD. I absolutely deal with PTSD to this day. I took too long to actually deal with it. That's another story. And I thought, I can't do this. I can't do this. I started getting help immediately because I didn't want to quit. That's what this is. That's what this is. And those kind of videos have increased over the last couple of years by 5,000%.
You said you received some aid after you had been exposed to this first set of videos. What is it about the way you looked at the world that had to change in order for you to adapt to what you were encountering?
Well, I had to come to grips with an idea that I had never been confronted with before, that there are people, and not a few, but millions of people, only millions of pedophiles could justify a demand of millions of child exploitation material, videos, and so forth. The first person you see arrested in the movie is a real person named Ernst Lupolszczynski in Sound of Freedom. He had over 2 million pieces of child rape material in his house. So to be confronted with the reality that there are people on this planet, and like I said, not a few, but millions, who want to indulge in watching 5-year-old children be raped and sexually assaulted in ways that, and I'm sorry to be so raw, but I feel comfortable with you, Dr. Peterson, but to watch children's bodies actually break in the act of sexual assault, acts that your mind couldn't conjure up if you tried to conjure it up, and that it's real, that is so shocking to the system. It changes your life forever. I tell people, if I feel like I've had a million holes burned into my brain because I've watched thousands of hours of that kind of material. Not only watch it, and I love the scene that Jim depicts where that's very real. I can't watch the movie, but the movie's very good. The movie doesn't show any of this, by the way. It doesn't show anything like this. I don't want people to run away and be scared. But you see the scene where the camera flashes a close up into Jim's eyes. And that was me for 10 years, not only watching, but writing it in details for the court to see, for the prosecutors to see, and raising children at the same time that are the very same age. And fortunately or unfortunately for me, I have 9 children. At the time I left the government at 6. And so I can always identify the age of a child with one of my own children. And what my mind was almost automatically doing is I would superimpose my own children's faces and persons onto these children. And that led to the PTSD, I'll be honest, and almost a paranoia about what would happen to my children and watching my children. And I've come a long ways, and I'm able to deal with it. But I was determined never to quit, and so I just sought more help, and I won't quit. So
these people that you've interacted with, like, what's your reaction to them when you talk to them? The pedophiles, when you talk to them and when you arrest them.
My experience is very similar to what you just described. Very nondescript. People of all walks of life. We've arrested and I've interrogated educators, lawyers, law enforcement, clergymen, and sitting across from them. But with no apparent physicality that would tell you who they are. But I will say this: when they start talking and I look into their eyes, that's when I sense something that really scares the hell out of me. And the way they talk about children when they get there, and it's something that they've been able to normalize. And they're speaking to me about children almost like they're talking about, the weather, or, talking about buying and selling children like you talk about buying and selling computer parts or an automobile or something. And that's where I thought, something has taken over you. Something non-human has made you less human. And I've never been able to figure it out. Only that it creeps me out. And I usually end up getting them to confess because they have brought themselves to a place where they think they're okay. They think that it's somehow normal.
Have you had these people justify themselves to you? And if so, by what means do they attempt to do that?
So one person that comes to mind, absolutely, the answer is yes. And one person that comes to mind is the person depicted in the film Oshensky. This person had written articles, self-published, of course. He had a book that he actually sold on Amazon. And his understanding or his justification was that the puritanical society of this country has crushed the true and beautiful and righteous sexual experience, which the most natural would be between a man and a child, a prepubescent child. A prepubescent child is the most beautiful form of humanity, and why take that away from a child? Children would be well conditioned to confront the challenges of life if only they could experience orgasmic pleasure even in their prepubescence. This is how they talk.
Right. Well, that you saw echoes of that. There was attempts made in the 1970s by French intellectuals, surprise, surprise, to have the age of consent reduced radically. And that was always the rationale. It was an extension of the patriarchal oppression theory in some sense, right? That all sexual expression is essentially pure and good in its most fundamental form. And it's all warped by social pressure. And if we were just allowed to express ourselves in every manner that we saw fit, then everyone would be free and we wouldn't suffer anymore from the constraints of tyrannical society, right? And it's just convenient for the bloody pedophiles that happens to justify them doing whatever the hell they want to children who are obviously too young to consent. Right, so he is a good example. I forgot about that in the book. Jim, let me ask you. So now you didn't have to go through the same things that Tim did, and you obviously weren't subject to the same kind of exposure, but you had to play this role and you had to act out in your imagination the darkness that characterized the people who played your enemies, let's say, on the screen. What were the consequences for you of having to delve even on the fictional landscape into this entire, what would you say, underworld domain?
Well, let's start with your story initially when you brought up Cain and Abel. In my years of working with agents like Tim, and I actually worked with other agents because Tim was very busy doing missions at the time, and I got to go into a lot of his world. I mean, those are the guys that I play, so I don't imitate other actors. I go and meet these guys and really learn and study what they do. Cain and Abel, for example, Abel is doing good things for God. How would Cain hurt God? By killing Abel, by wounding him. When I go and play, for example, a serial killer or a man that you mentioned earlier, Ted Bundy, who my friend broke that case and found out who he was, Mike Tando. So you're the beast that comes in you. He comes in and he deceives you and starts with the ego and the whole thing. And then eventually the turn is how that you're eventually not fair, non serviam, becomes one who, how can I wound God the most? By killing the most innocent child. And it wounds God in the greatest way when you take these innocent children who've done nothing and have no sin. And these guys have the attitude, which you were mentioning earlier, all the cutting of the corners and whatnot. And ultimately, they can kill the most innocent and effectively wounds God's heart the most.
Now, you said that you turned to God, so to speak, to protect yourself against false representations of evil, but also in some ways to shield yourself. And it sounds to me reminiscent of what Tim's superiors mentioned to him when they said to him that his faith might protect him
I love his question.
from what was... Okay, go ahead, man.
That's how I chose to go at this particular case. I had no choice but to go in. And I hear the screams in my heart. I hear the screams because of the agents that I got to work with, got to show me things. And one particular time, he says, "Are you sure you want to go further?" But I was weeping so hard. I said, this is what Tim goes through. This is what I got. I got to see it in order to go into there, to take people to a level of, will you do something? Will you do something? At some point, it ends for all of us. And so the pain in my heart is much better than the pain in the future. And if I have to see that to save my children, to motivate me to save my niece, to tell my sister, no, walking home at 13 years old from school is not a good choice. Not a good choice. My sister says to me, no, I want my daughter, to have the same kind of experience I have. And I said, no, not until this changes. You need to understand. So Anne, my sister, is a great mother, but she wasn't aware because the media that's supposed to do a good job to tell the truth, well, they're going into that direction, which is let's kind of twist it and change it and not talk about it. Or the three-letter agencies that aren't telling the truth. Go ahead, Jordan.
How has this changed you? How is experiencing that material and having to play it out changed you?
I'd give my life in a heartbeat. Changed me. I'm less concerned about myself than I am about the hurting. I will tell you this right now. I would absolutely die. If this were to change the world and get rid of trafficking and pornography and all of the 8 arms of this octopus that has to be destroyed, the only way you can destroy it is take the head out. If that hit, I'd give my life for it in a heartbeat.
Jim said that he was struck when talking to you about it with regard to this childlike innocence that he saw in you, which is a very peculiar thing to observe in someone who's had to expose himself to all the terrible things that you've encountered. And so I don't have a more fully developed question than that. I guess I'd just like your response to that set of observations.
I think I know what Jim's talking about. When we're doing operations, as you see depicted in Sound of Freedom, it's some crazy stuff. We're going into crazy places. We're talking to monsters and demons. And if I were to apply all the things I know, the things that take me down, the images of children, I could be jaded and less innocent. I think this might go back to the boss who asked me to start this work back in 2002 by saying that we think you can handle this because of your faith. So when I do try to be a childlike when it comes to my relationship with God, and there's a scripture that I repeat in my head constantly as I am going into these dark places. And that's where I become like a child through that recitation and my relationship with God, or even more particularly with Jesus, because it's Jesus who says the line, and you've already quoted it, Jordan, better that a millstone be placed around your neck and you tossed to the bottom of the sea than that you should hurt one of these little ones. That's so powerful to me because it allows me to reduce everything to just an innocent, I hope, childlike relationship with my Savior, with my God, because I know where He stands on this, and I might not know everything, and I don't know how this is going to resolve in my head. I don't know how I'm going to heal the millions of holes burned into my brain. But I do know that if I subject myself completely to an understanding and a testimony that Jesus believes something, He gets mafioso. This is cement shoes kind of talk. It's not flipping tables outside the temple. I mean, He's talking about violence. He's speaking violence, but it's righteous. And that's where He stands on children being abused.
So what's on your plate next? Where is this going as far as you're concerned? And what sort of impact have you had in sheer numbers? Why do you think you're not going to get taken out? Because it seems to me that you're in a situation where that's, of reasonable high probability given who you're dealing with. And what do you hope to accomplish over the next while? And what can people do to help?
Well, so I've changed quite a bit of how I look at the playing field of human trafficking. I can no longer do operations. I've been in the media too much, especially with this film. I've turned a lot of my attention to the fact that in what I call spiritual warfare, children are targeted like never before. I was on the Capitol Hill last week, and this congressman was telling me, how do we wake people up to the fact that all these unaccompanied minors are being shoved into America and we don't know where they are? And I said, well, your problem is you're not connecting all the dots, all the ways in which children are being hurt. Not only these 85,000 missing children that are now in the belly of the largest potentially child sex market in the world, but at the same time that's happening, you have groups trying to get rid of the name pedophile and call them minor attracted persons. At the same time, you're sexualizing children, giving them what I used to be able to arrest you for giving children. Now teachers in California and other states are giving this in the name of liberating children sexually or sex education. And now a 13-year-old can consent to gender mutilation and have themselves injected with all sorts of chemicals that might ruin their reproductive system. Well, what are you doing? Consent to do that equals consent eventually to sex with a 50-year-old pedophile. And so if you got to connect all these things. And so I for the first time in my life, Jordan, I'm looking at the United States of America, and I'm saying, look, I used to think I might be out of a job because we eradicated human trafficking. I am now thinking I might be out of a job because the very laws that protect children and allow us to go after their captors are being and will be decaying and eroded with this crazy culture that is taking children in the name of liberating them and in fact is enslaving them.
It is the fastest growing international crime network that the world has ever seen. It has already passed the illegal arms trade, and soon it's going to pass the drug trade. Because you can sell a bag of cocaine one time to a child 5 to 10 times a day. God's children are not for sale.
How long you been doing this?
12 years now.
How many pedophiles you got?
288.
How many kids you found?
Timoteo, tú rescatas niños, ¿verdad? ¿Puedes ayudarme a encontrar a mi hermana?
Te lo prometo.
For Homeland Security, you know we can't go off rescuing Honduran kids in Colombia.
Which means she'll disappear for good. Imagine walking into her room right now, seeing an empty bed. What we do?
You quit your job and you go and rescue those kids.
So at this moment, she could be a block down the road, or she could be at Moscow, Bangkok, LA. She's a major operator.
It's all rebel territory. No one goes in. Not the army, not the police, not us.
What if this was your daughter?
There's no Marine unit coming.
You're on your own. This job tears you to pieces. And this is my one chance to put those pieces back together.
When God tells you what to do,